Hello. Today I wanted to go over progressions for doing bear crawl, otherwise known as hand-foot crawling. It's a pretty fundamental crawling skill that it's pretty fun to do once you know how to do it comfortably and safely. So, to demonstrate a foot-hand crawl, yep, alternating hand-leg, back and forth. You can go sideways. It's a pretty functional movement. Crawling around, climbing over logs, lots of purposes. So, important thing when you're learning how to do this movement is to warm up. Make sure that all your joints and everything are prepared for doing it, because it is pretty strenuous on the arms if you're not used to it. So what I like to start out with is doing some wrist warm-up. So you start in a tabletop position, stacking your shoulder over your wrist and your hips over your knees, and then you just gently circle over your wrists, trying to keep your body weight shifted slightly forwards so that you can really feel the weight. I'm going to do about 5 to 6 circles per direction. Now, if you find that this position's a little bit too much weight on your hands, you want to just slide back towards your knees and you can do your circling there. That said, if you do find that the full tabletop position is hard on the wrists, it's going to take a while before you can do a bear crawl, because that is a pretty fundamental aspect of it, is being comfortable in that tabletop position. Now, once you do the circling, 5 to 6 each direction, you're going to want to take your hands, put them back your hands down onto the ground, and then come up one wrist at a time, and then come down one wrist at a time. Just back and forth with that. Again, keeping your weight centered over your hands. This is really good for warming up external forearms. Just back and forth. Again, 6, 7, whatever you're comfortable with, so you can feel a little bit of fatigue in your upper forearms. Next up, you want to warm up your hips and your legs. I like to do what are called hero squats for this. So I'll show perpendicular and then foot front on. So you're going to get into a high kneeling position with your toes engaged, stacked right over your knees. Take your arms and put them on your temples with your thumbs down. As you sit backwards, you're going to bring your elbows together. And then come forwards and bring your elbows open. Closed and open. You want to think about keeping yourself completely stacked vertically while you're doing this. So you don't want to lean backwards or forwards. Stacked, right? Back and forth. Trying to squeeze in your abs and with your glutes to really drive yourself up to that tall position. This is about, another 10 or so. Again, it kind of depends on how you're feeling with the movement and whether or not your legs have the endurance to do that many, right? Because you don't want to push this till you're feeling too much fatigue. It's just warming up the muscles and the joints to get you ready for working on your bear crawl. Okay, so next up, you want to do just a little bit of arm warm-up. I'll orient this way for that. This is a good way to just warm up the shoulders and scapula, get them all nice and active. So, again, in this high kneeling position, if this is a little hard for your toes, you can come, this is the high kneeling position. So, go from here, up and out to 90 degrees, back in and down to 90 and down. Just back and forth with that. Nice and relaxed. Trying to open your chest up as much as you can, really squeezing the shoulder blades together when you bring your arms back. Once you do about 10 or so in this orientation, you're going to go up to about a 45-degree angle. These are sometimes called Ys. The other ones are known as Ts. Again, about 10 or so. Really trying to feel the shoulder blades slide down your rib cage. And you want to prevent your ribs from flaring upwards. So you don't want to twist at the back. You want to keep your ribs down and lift. And the last one, straight up overhead, trying to get your arms parallel to each other. Again, about 10 of those. Now at this point, you should be feeling pretty warm. Wrists, joints, everything nice and active for this. So, to start with, you're going to get yourself in that nice tabletop position, right? So, again, that's shoulders stacked over the wrists, hips stacked over the knees. Your back should be nice and flat. Now, in this position, what you're going to do is the first progression towards your bear crawl is lift your arm off the ground and put it back down. Up and down. Just back and forth with that. You want to have no motion in the rest of your body. Right? Back and forth. That's feeling pretty comfortable. Get yourself set up again and do some leg extensions. Pushing your heel straight backwards as far as you can. Again, you want to have no motion in the rest of your body while you do this. So the goal is to prevent yourself from shifting, right? So if you extend and you're pushing your hip away, that means you're not holding in the core enough. So really squeeze and extend. Back and forth. You want to also make sure that with your wrists, you're thinking about pushing through the fingertips, like this. Because if you just stacked on the wrist and you just let it bend like that, that's going to be a lot of tension and stretching that's uncomfortable on the wrist. So when you're here, you really engage down with your fingers, like you're trying to lift yourself up. Obviously you don't, because then that's going to be even harder to balance. So, if you're feeling comfortable with the one limb at a time, the next step here is going to be to extend both. Right? Opposite arm legs, also known as bird dogs, a lot of different movement practices. Again, just back and forth with this, trying to create distance between your hand and your heel as you're doing these extensions. Just back and forth. Again, the goal here is to have as little movement as possible in the rest of your body, right? So if you're wobbling all over the place, slow down, really engage with your abdominal muscles, and try again. It sometimes helps if you breathe out while you extend, and then in. Exhale, inhale. Oh, also helps if you have some animal companions to keep you distracted while you're doing this. So, if you're feeling pretty comfortable with the bird dog, right, the next step is known as hand-knee crawling. Right? This is a progression to kind of train your body for the movement, for the alternating pattern of the bear crawl, but it's a lot easier than the being on your hands and your feet. So, get set up in that tabletop, and then, just like I demonstrated earlier, it's opposite arm leg moving at the same time. Back and forth. Right? And then you can go backwards. And you want to think about each time you're moving your hand or your knee to the opposite side. So you want to cover that full distance. Note how I bring my hand to the wrist and plant that. And then hand to the wrist and plant. You don't want to have, as you're doing that, your back round up. You want to keep yourself nice and square. And again, there's no lateral movement here, right? And be controlled while you're doing this. And you can work on that for as long as you need to until you feel comfortable doing that motion and keeping yourself stable, right? I would advise having some kind of padding until your knees get used to having the weight on them. It can be a little uncomfortable if you're not used to it. So, if you've gotten to the point that you can do hand-knee crawling fine and you're doing well with that, the next progression is to get back into the tabletop position. Now, you're going to get onto your toes here because the goal here is to lift the knees off and maintain that stacked position. Again, you want to have no motion while you're doing this. and you can put your knees back down. So this is going to be pretty intensive on the core and on the arms, on the wrist. That's the point of the warm-up. You want to make sure every time you try this that you've got yourself prepared until you're pretty comfortable with doing the motion, and then you can kind of incorporate it without too much other warming up. But if you just try and jump straight into this, it can be pretty intensive on the wrists because you're creating a lot of compression. So what you train for this one, lift off and hold. And you can just hold this for endurance, kind of like a plank, and then back down and lift off and hold. All right, and the goal here again, no swaying side to side, right? You're just stable and locked in position. Once you're feeling pretty comfortable with that, having your knees off, getting used to that weight on your hands, on your feet, the next one is kind of the same progression as we went through with the tabletop. So you're here, you're lifting the knees off to engage. This is called a primal position or quadruped position. And then what you do, you lift a limb off one at a time. Now, I like to start doing with my legs just like a little hamstring curl. That's how I start most of my clients with this motion, because doing the full leg extensions, like so, requires a little bit more control, right? But that's how you move through that progression, right? You start lifting the arm off, put it back down, other arm, and just cycle through that. And again, the goal here is to make sure that you're stable. You'll find that you might shift your weight around a little bit. You're gonna kick towards that post leg. So what you have to do to prevent the sideways shifting of your hips is to really engage on that side. So if you're lifting off with your right hand, you want to think about taking that left leg and pushing into the ground. Keep yourself stable. Same thing when you're going left arm. You engage with that right leg to prevent yourself from kicking over. That's going to be your natural response to shift your center of gravity towards that leg. Now, once you're pretty comfortable taking one limb off at a time, the next step is to try taking two limbs off, right? Makes sense. So you're up here, and it's an extension and back, and extension and back. Now, you want to make sure that as you're doing this, you don't allow yourself to rock backwards, because that is not how you bear crawl, right? You want to keep weight centered over your wrists and extend so that this hip is still over that knee. Now, some of these I might have shifted forward a little bit. It is hard to control that, and that is something that you want to focus on. Just making sure that you don't let your hips move forwards or backwards. It's helpful to focus on the wrist positioning and just kind of leave your legs alone. But, you know, I would advise taking video so you can watch yourself. That's going to be the easiest thing if you don't have someone else to spot you. So you're here and you extend. Right? The nice thing about this one is you can hold and really work on your balance control. Once you're feeling comfortable with this motion, this quadruped bird dog, as I like to call it, you can try throwing in diagonal motions, right, where you're moving the weight further outside your midline to make it more challenging to control. You really have to get the abdominal muscles engaged to do that. Now, once you're at that point and you can very comfortably control that bird dog with the quadruped, you're pretty much at your bear crawl. So you get set up, a nice tabletop, lift the knees off, and then again, opposite hand foot, bring your knee to your wrist, keeping yourself as stable as possible so you have very little lateral shifting. Right, back and forth with that, working on your control. It's a really good arm and core exercise, and you're going to feel it in the quads if you spend enough time there. Whew. And I'm winded just from going through that little warm-up and progression. So, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please, leave a comment, and let me know if you want to see any other tutorial videos. Have a nice day.